All right.
Matthew,
All right. Yes, Don.
before we sit here for 40 minutes, can you explain your shirt that says Hitman across it?
This
so
is
that we don't have to sit
it's my ugly Christmas sweater for this week. It's my Brett the Hitman Hart ugly Christmas sweater. I don't think it needs much introduction, but Don needed to understand.
Well, I know, but I'll think about it. I'll think about it.
You'll think about it class? All right.
Okay,
Eyes up
okay.
here. Eyes up here. All right. We are in Daniel chapter 11. Don't go in that. Just go in. We're in Daniel chapter 11. We're going to start in verse number 5. This is a very thick chapter. It is a very, very dense chapter. There's a lot to cover here, all right? And the entirety of it concerns a prophecy that God gives to Daniel, the point of which is easily lost as you get into the weeds of dates and names and places and scandals and wars and battles and things. But the purpose behind getting this vision is to resolve within Daniel his own lingering frustrations and sadness and anxiousness over getting out. When are we going to get out, like you promised us, of exile in Babylon and go back to our promised land, go back to the land that you said we could go back to once we've learned our lesson. We've been spanked, we've been in time out. Now we want to go back and we want to play in our room again. And so when is that going to happen? They've been there for so many decades. This started when Daniel was a teenager, and now he's pushing 80. They're still in exile, and they're about to get out, but he doesn't know that yet. So he is fretting, and God says, let me tell you just an overview of what's to come between now and the era of the Messiah, basically, that is to come. All right? So that's where we are. We're in the middle of all this, and we just finished last week in verse number 4, which was a prophecy talking about the rise of Alexander the Great and how when he died, his kingdom, the Macedonian Empire, will be split into 4 parts. And so we take those 4, and we're going to focus mostly on 2 of those 4 parts, Egypt and Syria, or Egypt and the Seleucid Empire that will rise. So let's zero in on that as we go into verse number 5, all right? And the king of the south shall be strong, and one of his princes, and he shall be strong above him and have dominion. His dominion shall be a great dominion. All right. So Alexander dies. His kingdom fractures. And as I say, we shift now to 2 of those kings, and we're going to divide them up and call them the king of the north and the king of the south. The king of the south is Egypt. The king of the north, though it's not very far north, it's just north of Egypt, is the Seleucids. All right. So the king of the south at this point, now, your Bible's not going to give you names. It does occasionally. Cyrus is mentioned a couple of times, and you'll get a few names here and there. But for the most part, we're given descriptions. We're given just kind of blurred images, vague descriptions that just, if you just had one of them, there would be thousands of characters in history. You'd never be able to put them together. But instead, what you're given are these kind of abstract, like I say, just blobs, right, that are all over the place. And if you just had one of them, if this was the only thing that God said in the prophecy, this vague abstract blob described as a king that rises to power and falls briefly. Well, that's like 1,000 kings. That's nothing. But you take this description, and he's succeeded by this king who does this, which could apply to a lot of people, but once you connect it to another one, you immediately start narrowing it down. Who's connected to this and this and this, and these dots start being put together until you realize, oh, okay, this must be this guy in history. And I can trace it backward, which means this is this guy. And yep, that tracks in history. This is this person. Yeah, and that's who this lady is. And you can, eventually, it's like as you look at all of the pieces of the puzzle, you see, oh, it's a ship on the ocean, and there's its sail. But if you just had the little white piece, you don't know it's a sail. You don't know what it is. But you have all these pieces provided, and so you're able to start to see a full picture. So we're going through it piece by piece, pun intended. So this isn't going to make sense, but when it's all done, the whole tapestry of it is going to come together cohesively. The king of the south is Ptolemy the First. Ptolemy the First, Soter of Egypt, who was a powerful ruler who was upstaged by Seleucus the First, Nicator of Syria, king of the south, king of the north. Leading to the rise of Nicator's rise, the rise of the Seleucid Empire, which is a greater domain, a greater empire than that which Ptolemy the First was able to have in Egypt. And this, because they both are the offspring, proverbially, of Alexander, their empires came from his. This natural rivalry is going to start between them, and they're going to try them and their descendants are going to try to one-up each other. It's just this long, almost like family feud between the ruler of Egypt and the ruler of the Seleucid Empire. And we're going to see that feud play out in all of its twists and turns in politics and backstabbings throughout this. I said this last week and I'll say it again. If you don't like history, I have nothing to offer you this week, okay? Because Jesus is only in the background of this. He's not in the foreground this time. So, King of the South is going to be strong, and one of his princes, who is going to be the King of the North. Why is he called a prince? Well, we'll find out. Well, I can just tell you, because he's the nephew of the Egyptian ruler. All right, verse 6. And in the end of years they shall join themselves together, for the king's daughter of the south shall come to the king of the north to make an agreement. But she shall not retain the power of the arm, neither shall he stand, nor his arm, but she shall be given up, and they that brought her, and they that begat her, and he that strengthened her in these times. Again, vague phrases could apply to a lot of things, but we're piecing things together to figure out who we're talking about. The daughter of Ptolemy I is, the daughter in question, is the daughter of Ptolemy's the first son. So it's the daughter of Ptolemy II, Philadelphus, whose name is Bernice. And she's going to marry, the King James calls it, make an agreement, with Antiochus II, Theos of Syria. All right, so you've got, let me erase this because this is nonsense here. All right, so I don't have time for the map. You've got Egypt down here, E for Egypt. You've got Syria here, or the Seleucids. It works both ways, S. All right. So you've got Ptolemy I. Now he's gone. Now we've got Ptolemy II's daughter. He is going to marry her off to here. All right. So her name is Bernice. She's going to marry Antiochus II, Theos of Syria. So all seems like it's going to go well, but the problem is Antiochus II doesn't really love the daughter of Ptolemy II. He loves his other wife, whose name starts with an L. Where is it? Laodice. Laodice. He still loves Laodice. He still wants to be married to Laodice, and he tries to juggle both women, which you just can't do. Laodice, who is aware of this, goes along with her for a time, and then decides he's probably eventually going to leave me high and dry, because here is obviously a much more politically and powerful marriage to have. So she decides, I'm going to take matters in my own hands. She's going to divorce her husband and kill her husband, but she's actually going to kill her husband first and then divorce him, because she's stone cold that way. All right? So she's going to kill Antiochus II. Once he's out of the way, Laodice, that's just how I'm going to pronounce it. She's going to convince her brother, Ptolemy III Eugrets, to take the throne for himself. Actually, I think I said that wrong. It's his daughter marrying him. She kills him. She's going to convince her. Dadgummit. I swear, this is the hard. I practiced this, and it's just so hard because I don't like using my notes. I like knowing it and just looking at you. But I'm going to have to read my notes. Here's what I wrote. And it was right when I wrote it, so it must be right now. Laodice was worried that Antiochus II might leave her one day, so she poisoned him and divorced him in that order. All right, verse 7. With Antiochus out of the way, she convinces her brother, Ptolemy III Eugrets, to take the throne for himself. Of course, there's also Bernice and her infant child that exists. So what she does is she kills Bernice and Bernice's infant child, because she's stone cold that way. So she can assure that her brother has unquestioned control over Syria. Okay, there it is. Yes. All right. So that's the world history of it. What Daniel says is verse 7. But out of a branch of her roots shall one stand up in his estate. We shall come with an army and shall enter into the fortress of the king of the north and shall deal against him and shall prevail. Ptolemy III is going to be the branch of her roots, who's going to stand up to rule over the king of the north, taking the throne from Antiochus II, and he will prevail. But God's in control. He's not going to prevail for long. Okay, verse number 8. And prevail, and shall also carry captives into Egypt, namely their gods with their princes, the King James says, but not people. It's more like royal images and famous things that are inscribed by or connected to those rulers, with their precious vessels of silver and gold. It's just bounty and booty and riches and things like that. And he shall continue more years than the king in the north. So you've got a power struggle here between the north and the south, and Syria, which includes Jerusalem. That whole region is the battleground. So Jerusalem is right in the middle of this, right in the line of fire. It's rarely talked about, Jerusalem is, throughout this. We'll get to it in a little bit, but it's not really the focus. It's the big picture stuff. But what you're noticing is, between these two warring factions, Jerusalem is square in the middle of it. all right? God's people. And what separates this prophecy from, prophecies that you can find in Nostradamus and Madame Cleo and people like that, is it's not just a vague thing that could apply to a lot of things. It's this thing that connects to these things, which eventually paint a picture that cannot be disputed and clearly points to various people, places, and things. All right. Ptolemy III is going to bring captives from Syria into Egypt in the form of these idol statues and these images of royalty and trinkets and gold and silver and so forth. And he's going to reign for about 50 years, far beyond the king that he overthrew from Syria. But remember, God's in control. Verse 9, if you took verse 9 and just pretended like it didn't exist, verse 8 and verse 10 form one complete thought. Bible writers do this, ancient writers do this sometimes. They just inject a little parenthetical, and it sometimes throws your flow of the read off. But verse 9 says, so the king of the south shall come into his kingdom and shall return to his land. Seems like a harmless, innocuous statement. But if you don't realize that that whole verse 9 is just a little parenthetical, just a little sidebar, it's going to screw up all your pronouns that you have going forward. All right? Because when it says in verse 10, his sons, you'd think, oh, his. The pronoun refers back to the previous proper noun, verse 9, the king of the south's sons. But it's not the king of the south's sons. It's verse 8, the king of the north. He will prosper more years than the king of the north. But his sons shall be stirred up, and shall assemble a multitude of great forces, and one shall certainly come and overflow and pass through. Then shall he return and be stirred up, even to his fortress. All right, so the king of the south is going to reign longer than the king of the north. But the sons of the king of the north, which include Antiochus III, also called Antiochus the Great, and Seleucus III, Cyrannus. Remember these two guys? They're going to be important later. They're going to rise up against Ptolemy III and Ptolemy IV, which in Egypt, you've got Ptolemy III and Ptolemy IV. You've got Antiochus, which one are we on? Third? Antiochus III and Seleucus III, Cyrannus. So these are the rulers, one after the other. These are the rulers, one after the other. So this is where the feud is. Started with Ptolemy I, now we're at the third and the fourth, and so they're clashing. All right? One's going to rise up against each other, crash into them, and try to defeat them, and actually are going to overthrow for a time Egypt. Syria is. Antiochus the Great is going to conquer Ptolemy IV and his people, and he's going to do so by marching right through Jerusalem. A common theme in this, Jerusalem is just a stepping stone. That's how the world views it. God says, you're the most important place on earth, because for you will come my Messiah. Through you will come my Messiah. But Judea is just a stepping stone now. So south marches down to fight. Verse 11, Daniel 11:11. And the king of the south shall be moved with choler, the King James says, choler, anger. And he shall come forth and fight with him, even with the king of the north. And he shall set forth a great multitude, but the multitude shall be given into his hand. So Egypt is not going to give up to Syria without a fight. Ptolemy is going to be moved with anger. He's going to mobilize an army against Antiochus. He's going to win enough battles to force a temporary ceasefire, even though they're not firing things, so they don't have guns, so it's just whatever you call that. And in the winter, in the middle of this ceasefire, when everything is calm, he's going to launch a sneak attack. He's going to launch a surprise invasion, marching through Palestine, once again, marches right over God's land, to launch a sneak attack against Antiochus in battle. And this is the climax of this battle between the king of the south and the king of the north. The sneak attack in the winter, when they were supposed to be at truce, leads to the big, you can read it in history, it's a famous, awesome battle to study, the Battle of Raphia, which occurs in June of 217. It takes a long time to get through the winter. June 217 BC. Listen to this. You have 75,000 soldiers under Ptolemy. You have 68,000 soldiers under Antiochus. And both sides have their own swordsmen and archers and mounted warriors and their own war elephants. It's the only battle in history where Western elephants fight Eastern elephants. From the big ears and the little ears fight each other. It's the only battle in history where that happens. I don't even know what the elephants do to fight. I just love that idea, that little factoid. All right, so anyway. 75 over here, 68 over here, elephants everywhere. The king of the north has his multitude, Antiochus in the north, and the king of the south has his multitude. And according to secular history, Ptolemy is only going to lose a couple of thousand soldiers in the battle. Antiochus is going to lose 14,000 soldiers, men, and I suppose also elephants. But that's not the end of it. The Syrian wars, which is what this is called in history, have two more big fights. The Battle of Panium, which is won by the Seleucids, and the Battle of Antioch, which is won by Ptolemy VI, but we're not there yet. We're only on 3 and 4. Verse 12. And when he had taken away, you should have seen how many Wikipedia pages I had open when I was doing this research. It was just war everywhere. Verse 12. And when he had taken away the multitude, his heart shall be lifted up, and he shall cast down many 10,000s, but he shall not be strengthened by it. Big victor at Raphia, other victories that follow. Ptolemy is going to swell with pride. His heart is lifted up, it says. And he's going to overthrow and kill many 10,000s. But he's not going to be completely able to subdue his rivals. He will not be strengthened despite so much killing. He will not be as supremely dominant as someone like his ruling forebearer, Alexander, or Cyrus over here, and whomever. Why won't he be? He seems like he's got the strategy. He seems like he's got the army. Seems like he's got the motivation. But God decided, no, you're not going to rule. God decides who's in power. So he has all this going for him. He kills all these people and he can't win. Why not? Because, verse 13, the king of the north shall return, and he shall set forth a multitude greater than the former, and shall certainly come after certain years with a great army and with much riches. I've got 75. I've got 68. I win. Well, now I'm going to come at you with 95 over 75. It's like when Bugs Bunny and Yosemite Sam, 6-shooter, 7-shooter, 8-shooter, 9-shooter. I'm just going to come out with a bigger army. Like these people are just expendable tools for battle. Bigger armies beget bigger armies. Now it helps by this point that Ptolemy IV was dead and he was replaced. Make sure I have it right. Yes, by Ptolemy V. I had to get my numbers right. 4 is replaced by Ptolemy V, who was only 4 years old. So they're completely relying on military strategists and people. And there's not that one guy who can make all the decisions because, I mean, Joshua's 6. And I can't even get him to find his shoes. Caleb is 13. I can't get him to find his shoes. Jack is 15. I can't get him to find it. Imagine trusting the whole kingdom in the war, and the new king is 4. So, yeah. Antiochus is going to obviously start conquering and winning. He's going to be busy in the east. He's going to win battles against the Parthians in Persia. He's going to subdue parts of India, which is where he gets his great riches. Where does he get his great army, which the verse mentions in verse 13? Verse 14 tells you. In those times there shall be many who stand up against the king of the south. All right. So the king of the north is going to amass great riches and a great army. He gets the riches by conquering Egypt, or by conquering India and more of Persia. Where is he going to get his great army? Into verse 14. Robbers of your people, robbers of the Jewish people, shall exalt themselves to establish the vision, but they shall fall. What will happen is people are going to be eager to rise up to challenge and potentially overthrow the toddler Ptolemy. All right. So Antiochus the Great, when he hears there's a new Ptolemy in town, he's going to try to form an alliance with Philip V of Macedon. Not the famous Philip of Macedon, that was Philip II. This is Philip V of Macedon. So in the middle of all this, Daniel is told, while this is happening in the big picture, and there's a microcosm thing that's going to happen with your people. And what he says is, robbers of your people, the King James says. What does your Bible say in this part?
Those who are violent.
Yes, violent people from among you. Evil doers from among you. Violent ones from among your people is the literal translation. You don't have to be a big pagan warlord. You don't have to be a Ptolemy or an Antiochus to be a villain in this narrative. All you have to be is a person of God who wants to side with an evil person for worldly gain. And that's what you find here. Among the people, there will be people who will think they're fulfilling prophecy by rising up to fight against the king of the south. And they will do great evil, thinking they're doing what God wants. Look at what the text again says in verse 14. They will exalt themselves to what end? To establish the vision, the King James says. What does your Bible say?
Fulfill the vision.
Yes. In other words, God says, I'm writing this vision. They're going to read this vision. They're going to think, I want them to do this. They're going to hear the prophecies of Daniel saying this king's going to be overthrown. And they think, well, let's go fight. Just because God tells you it's going to happen doesn't mean he necessarily wants you getting yourself in the thick of it. But some of these people from Jerusalem, which I keep marking, what do you call it? There's Jerusalem. Some of these people in Jerusalem are going to think, God wants us to overthrow this guy, so let's pick up our swords and start killing. But no, that's not what he wanted. They thought that, and they're going to end up dying because of that. They're violent-minded Jews. whom God condemns. Here. Verse 15. So the king of the north shall come and cast up a mount, the King James says, and take the most fenced cities. And the arms of the south shall not withstand, neither his chosen people, neither shall there be any strength to withstand. So there's a big battle described here. And if you just try to track the prophecy with laying the history on top of it, so you have the vague references with the names and dates and places and figures and people on real history, and it tracks and it gives you the supplemental material. So you have this big battle that Antiochus has over the city of Sidon in 203 BC. And this big battle of Sidon, where it was a fortified city that he won through siege conflict. He takes down the besieged city. And that helped him. That victory led to the cascade of him taking Palestine under his control, which is the staging point to the whole southern invasion. So the phrase in the King James, the king of the north will cast up a mount, that's siege warfare talk. He's going to try to take down their walled defenses, which is exactly how Sidon fell to Antiochus. So Egypt is going to throw its best fighters, Ptolemy's chosen people, at the Seleucids, but they will not defeat the north. Verse 16. But he that comes against him shall do according to his will, and none shall stand before him. And he shall stand in the glorious land, which by his hand shall be consumed. So the pendulum is going to swing hard in favor of the north, the Seleucids. And it's described here as this force that does according to his own will. He's going to come in, he's just going to do whatever he wants. That's just, Daniel's used phrases like that before. This guy who can, whatever he sets his eyes to, he's going to have. He's just this unstoppable conquering force. That's what Antiochus thinks he is. And the text says, he will stand in the glorious land. He's going to stand in Jerusalem. He's going to plant his feet there and say, all right, I can see Egypt, and I'm taking it. I'm going to do it. I have my plans. I have my will. Because look, no one has stopped me thus far. No one will stop me. And eventually God's going to say, that's far enough. And that's the part that he doesn't realize. So again, all Judea is to these world powers is just an access point. It's a junction to southern, if you're going this way, Egypt, or if you're going this way to modern-day Turkey. Wherever you want to get through, it's this fertile area that you can easily conquer because it's just Jerusalem. It's like that big on a map. You know, it's that big on a globe. But it's the most important place there is because God picks it. And he picked it because it was so insignificant. So that's their idea that they didn't understand. 17. He, north, Antiochus, shall set his face to enter with the strength of his whole kingdom, and upright ones with him. And thus he shall do, and shall give him the daughter of women, corrupting her. She shall not stand on his side, neither before him. All right, let's take the prophecy. Let's overlay it with history. Antiochus is going to try to win this war over Ptolemy, not just through brute military force, but with a marriage alliance. Let's try politics. So he's going to offer up his daughter to marry the Ptolemy in charge of Egypt at the time. His daughter is going to marry, but she's not going to stay aligned and allied with her father. She's going to go her own way. She's not necessarily going to, just do whatever her husband wants either, because as soon as he dies, she's going to declare herself the queen of Egypt. And she's going to say, we're going to stay independent. We're not going to make an alliance, a union. We're going to stay independent, and I'm going to be over here. Who can tell me what her name was? Cleopatra the First. Cleopatra was the daughter of a Seleucid who becomes an Egyptian by marriage as a political power brokering move. But she, independently minded, goes her own way. Now, this is not the Cleopatra that's Elizabeth Taylor. We're 100 years away from that. That's Cleopatra number 7. This is Cleopatra number 1. But that's the history of the lineage that connects to Egypt. Verse 18. After this shall he turn his face to the isle. So, I'm going to try to use my daughter Cleopatra to connect these two empires together, presumably thinking her child will be the union of these two, and there's your connection, there's your legacy. But when that's rebuffed, he turns his attention up here to the isles, the Mediterranean Sea, the Aegean Sea, and so forth. And he takes many, it says in verse 18. But a prince for his own behalf shall cause the reproach offered by him to cease. Without his own reproach, he shall cause it to turn upon him. So he can't take Egypt. So Antiochus sets his eyes on the Mediterranean islands and the Aegean islands and takes many. And according to history, lay it on top, by 196 BC, Antiochus conquers much of Asia Minor. So again, let me draw a small version real quick. All right. All right. And then you got Okay, there. Italy, Aegean Sea, so you got Corinth down here, you know, islands everywhere. All right, there's your Sea of Galilee, Dead Sea, Jordan River. All right, Nile. All right, so Seleucids, Egypt, Jerusalem in the middle. Can't go this way. Let's go this way. Right? That straight should be much smaller. It doesn't matter. You're not judging me. All right, so he goes this way, and he takes a lot of things over here. All right, that's where we are. God allows for a prince to rise up and turn the tables on him, which causes Antiochus to fall back. So who is this person, this ruler that comes from over here to rebuff? In history, we're laying it on top, there's a guy named Lucius, not Scorpio, Scipio, which it sounds like S-H-I-P, but it's actually S-C-I-P. I don't know how it would be pronounced today, but back in Latin it would be Scipio. Lucius Scipio is a general who leads a fight against the invasions of the Seleucids, led by Antiochus. And he stops his advance and his taking of Asia Minor, which would have led to taking what we call modern-day Europe. And he stops at the Battle of Magnesia, and they have a big fight, and it's a big victory for Rome. It's a devastating loss for the Seleucids. They have to sign the Treaty of Apamea, and that stops their invasion of Asia Minor. They turn around and go home. So Antiochus was a guy, remember way back when he was described as this guy who whatever he set his mind to, he could conquer. That was like 2 verses ago, long time ago. And now the turntables, halved. All right, verse 19. Then shall he turn his face toward the fort of his own land. Can't go here, I've been rebuffed. I got to go back to my own secured places. The fort of his own land, but he shall stumble and fall and shall not be found. Which is a very poetic way of saying he's going to die, but it won't be glorious, it won't be glamorous, it won't be anything the historians will make a big ado about. He's just going to fizzle out and peter out and die, like an 80s hair band. So the empire that Antiochus the Great builds is starting to crumble. As he wins and loses and loses and loses and wins and loses and loses, the losses mount up more than the wins. His empire starts to crumble around him. You have cities and provinces that were under his control. They start saying they all want to be independent. This is just what happens over and over. And he cannot marshal the forces to win those fights again. So he looks for victory somewhere else. So he turns around and he starts heading this way, which I won't draw. He starts heading back to Persia to fight there. And according to history, in 187 BC, he was last seen looting a temple of Baal in Luristan, which is today modern-day Iran. And he angered the locals, who, it is said, swarmed him like an angry mob and bludgeoned him to death with their fists. And that was his ignominious death for Antiochus. The 3rd or 4th, or whichever one we're on. Doesn't matter, because he's going to leave behind 2 descendants. 2 descendants. One who is going to make the guy who just died, who was called in history Antiochus the Great and Terrible. He's going to make him, this descendant, look like Antiochus the it could be worse. And that guy, we're going to read about in just a minute. Verse 20. Verse 20. Then shall stand up in his estate a raiser of taxes and the glory of the kingdom. But within a few days he shall be destroyed, neither in anger nor in battle. So I say, this Antiochus, who did all this, and eventually peters out and dies, 2 descendants, one of whom, big deal. Before you get to that guy, there's this other guy. Seleucus III Cyrannus, the son, grandson of Seleucus III Cyrannus. Seleucus IV is his name. This guy's name is Seleucus IV. Don't worry, this isn't on a test. Seleucus IV Philopater. All right, that's the one guy. His whole claim to fame, he came, he saw, he raised a bunch of taxes, he died, and no one cared. That's it. All right. But if you thought that was bad, the next guy, verse 21, in his estate shall stand up a vile person, to whom they shall not give the honor of the kingdom, but he shall come in peaceably and obtain the kingdom by flatteries. Seleucus IV is succeeded by Antiochus IV. Antiochus IV is going to be known by his own naming, Antiochus Epiphanes, Antiochus, the god among men. And he is going to subdue and war against the Jews, who will whisper about him Antiochus Epimanes, Antiochus the insane guy. That's what they will call him. Minor distinction, but very important. We read about him in passing and briefly back in chapter 8, but here's his formal introduction. We read about him later also in chapter 9. You can read about him if you study the War of the Maccabees, the Maccabean Rebellion. Judah Maccabee led the revolt against him to free Israel from his control, but we're getting there. Anyway, I want you to connect 20 and 21, okay? In 20, we read about Seleucus IV Philopator. What happened to him? He raised some taxes, didn't live very long, dies. All right. He succeeded, verse 21. But it doesn't say that Antiochus IV took over because the guy died. It's not like, well, you know, accidents happen. This is more like accidents happen. This is like he fell off a flight of stairs accident. This is like the poison for Cusco, the poison specially made to kill Cusco. That kind of accident. So it says that Antiochus IV obtained the kingdom not because his brother died. He obtained the kingdom by flatteries, through peaceable means. So not a revolt, not a rebellion, not an obvious attack, but through duplicitous means. Well, if you take the fact that he didn't live very long and died, and the next guy took over through duplicitous means, I mean, you're not connecting too many dots. We know how people take over when it's not a war. You know, somebody in the night, and then suddenly, hey, I'm in charge now. All right, probably someone poisoned his coffee. Is what I'm saying. All right, 22. And with the arms of a flood shall they be overflown from before him, Antiochus, this new guy, and shall be broken, yea, also the prince of the covenant. So what we're going to get here is a few verses that describe just what kind of a vile guy this vile guy is. That was, by the way, the description. I'm going to say it again. In verse 21, his estate, after the previous guy, will stand up a vile person. It's not my words. That's the Holy Spirit's description of this person. This vile, this odious, this despicable. That's God's summation. Not what you want on your tombstone. All right? 22. With arms of a flood, those he sets his eyes to destroy, will be overflown from before him, and shall be broken, including even the prince of the covenant. Covenant here, not God covenant with man covenant, just treaties. He's the kind of ruler who will make an agreement with you. He'll sign a treaty with you and then go back on it and attack you when you're not looking. 23. And after the league made with him, he shall work deceitfully, for he shall come up and shall become strong with the small people. Antiochus IV is the kind of ruler who will make a deal with you at breakfast and plot to overthrow you at lunch. He is Hitler signing a non-aggression pact with Russia while planning to invade Russia and then invading Russia. At the same time, Stalin is signing the same pact while planning to invade Germany. That's that kind of person that we're dealing with here. 24. He shall enter peaceably, even upon the fattest... 23, into the verse. He shall become strong with small people. He's not a ruler who gets swept up by a tide of public support. He's a ruler who sneaks around, uses duplicitous tactics, and has a small number of loyalists that he has paid off, that he is keeping happy and fat and fed and protected, who are overseeing his coup into power, basically. He's not a popular guy. 24. He shall enter peaceably, even upon the fattest places of the province, the wealthiest. Wealth and fat, those two were connected back then. And he shall do that which his fathers have not done, nor his fathers' fathers. He shall scatter among them the prey and spoil and riches, and they shall forecast his devices against strongholds, even for a time. He's the kind of ruler that goes to the richest, fattest provinces, and when the guard is lowered, knife in the back. And despite, how evil and duplicitous his ancestors were, is nothing in compared to him. He betrays his allies. It says he steals their riches. He scatters the loot to his small band of followers. Probably didn't like dogs either. It's probably a cat person. And then Daniel says he has all this plotting and all this evil doing. Look at the last of the verse, even for a time. He will do wicked, do wicked, do wicked until he just will not do wicked anymore. And when will he not do wicked anymore? When he's dead. He will do all this and it'll be terrible, but just for a time, because God is still in control. 25. He shall stir up his power and his courage against the king of the south with a great army. And the king of the south shall be stirred up in a battle with a very great and mighty army. But he shall not stand, for they shall forecast devices against him. It's been a while since we read about the south, about Egypt. Last time they were seen being ruled by Cleopatra, remember? At this point, Egypt is led by Ptolemy VI Philometor, who is the son of Cleopatra I. And against him, Antiochus is going to launch an assault and lead his great army, march them all the way down, all the way even to, all the way even to Egypt. Not the city of the Presleys, but the city of the Ptolemies. All right? So he's going to fight all the way to the front doorstep of the Egyptian stronghold. And it's going to be very successful for the north. And it will lead to Ptolemy's brother, Ptolemy VIII, expelling Ptolemy the 6th out of Egypt because he was poor at his job. So the 8th is going to take power. Ptolemy the 8th, we're now to Ptolemy the 6th. He can't fight against this losing, so Ptolemy the 8th is going to take power. What happened to Ptolemy the 7th? He was loyal to his father, and he was gone too. He went with him. So, Antiochus' reign of terror, pretty successful so far. 26. Yea, they that feed the portion of his meat shall destroy him, and his army shall overflow, and many shall fall down slain. Ptolemy the 6th's reign is going to end after a series of disgraceful defeats. His army is going to be swept away. Ptolemy the 8th is going to take over. In fact, what happens with Ptolemy the 6th and Ptolemy the 8th, Ptolemy the 6th loses a whole lot, is told by his brother, why don't you lie low for a while? Why don't you just get out of town and I'll help you. So he flees into exile. And while he's in exile, his brother's like, well, I guess I'm in charge now. And he takes over and he sends assassins to kill his brother. I mean, we're talking duplicitous stuff here. All right? So, wait, hang on. Oh yeah. If you want to study a lot of history, most history will tell you Ptolemy the 6th was a swell guy. It's because he made a lot of alliances with Greece, and a lot of history from this era is written by Greek historians who can be biased. But there are a few other more Eastern histories that give you a clearer picture of what happened with that dude. So anyway, he ends up being expelled. He travels to Rome looking for allies. Ptolemy the 6th does, looking for allies. He finds none. Goes over Asia Minor, settles in Cyprus. In fact, he settles in Cyprus and he makes friends. He makes friends with an unlikely guy who's also been doing some conquering. When Ptolemy the 6th is expelled before he's killed, while he's wandering around looking for ways to take back his kingdom, he lands in Cyprus and he meets Antiochus Epiphanes, like just at a bar somewhere. They just run into each other and they say, you know, we've got a lot in common. We're both really evil. We both love conquering. We should team up. And they both are like, yeah, we should totally team up. And they're both thinking, I'm so going to stab you in the back. And I'm going to take all of your goods after we win whatever war it is we're going to start. It's just crazy how history works out. This is not even Bible right now. It's just crazy that just in world history, like you never read this in Daniel, it's right there in all your Encyclopedia Britannicas. You have this guy and this guy who are only connected through a few skirmishes that their ancestors fought and what the Bible says matter. And these guys both end up just by, random circumstances on the same island. It's not even a big island. Just, that's amazing to me. Anywho, they're both going to try and overthrow each other. 28. Then he shall return to his land with great riches, and his heart shall be against the holy covenant, and he shall do exploits and return to his own land. So Ptolemy the 6th's exile will return him to Egypt. He'll have this support that will not last. There will be a lot of rioting and threatening to burn the city down, which is an ironic threat because Alexandria will, the library will burn down. He's going to march into Alexandria, threatening to burn the city down if they don't give him his throne back. And the library is going to go eventually. Just historical irony. Anywho, the king of the north is going to return to his own land with his great riches from all of his conquests, and he's going to be drunk with power. He's going to be drunk on some victories, and he's going to set his sights on Jerusalem, the Holy Covenant, and the King James says he's going to do exploits. He's going to do a lot of evil things to God's people. He's going to do whatever he wants. The book of Maccabees, which is apocryphal, Catholic Bibles have it. You can study it as history. It tells us that when Antiochus makes his way back through, he lands back in Jerusalem, and it says that in the book of the Maccabees that he attacks Jerusalem, takes 40,000 prisoners, sells another 40,000 into slavery, enters the temple, sacrifices an unclean swine on the brazen altar. This guy's a really bad guy. 29. At the time appointed he shall return and come toward the south, but it shall not be as the former or as the latter. After about 2 years, Antiochus IV is going to attack Egypt. Remember, we shook hands, and he's going to attack. But it will not be successful as his previous two campaigns. Why not? Verse 30. For ships of, the King James says, Chittim. What does your Bible say? Kittim with a K? All right, it's those of Cyprus, all part of the same lineage. Ships from Cyprus will come against him, and therefore he shall be grieved and return and have indignation against the holy covenant. So shall he do, even he shall return and have intelligence with them that forsake the holy covenant. So, in other words, he's going to have a lot of campaigns, he's going to fight, and he's going to be rebuffed. So he's going to go back to Jerusalem, and like an abusive husband who gets embarrassed at work, he's going to take out his aggression on his subjects in Jerusalem. He's going to attack Jerusalem, and he's going to eventually be defeated again. The ships of Kittim are going to come and cause him to flee. And he's going to attack Kittim. I forgot where I was at. Attacks Kittim and comes back and attacks Jerusalem. That's what he's doing. And he will attack those who forsake, who stay true to the covenant by joining with those who forsake the Holy Covenant. Oh God, I'm sweating up here like you wouldn't believe. All right, it's so hard to keep straight on this because look how hard it is to keep this straight. So he's attacking Kittim, and they rebuff him. He goes to Jerusalem, and that's where we are. Verse 31. And arms shall stand on his part, and they shall pollute the scenery of strength, and shall take away the daily sacrifice, and they shall place the abomination that makes desolate. So he's in Jerusalem, he's doing a lot of wicked to Jerusalem. One thing Antiochus IV, Antiochus the terrible, the evil Antiochus guy, is going to do, like was alluded to before, he desecrates the temple, the sacred place. He offers a swine on the brazen altar. He forbids feast days from being celebrated. He blows out the candle of the menorahs. He completely ransacks the interior of the holy place and so forth. He just does a lot of crazy things to hurt God's people. I don't know if I said it. He takes away the daily sacrifice, things like that. And the speculation as to what his motivation was, like historically, like why, because it's just history. And Antiochus just goes bananas on Jerusalem and Judea. Why does he do that? And the idea is it was part of his jurisdiction. It's part of his domain. But Jerusalem and the Jews in particular, have always been seen by everyone around them as this odd duck people. Because they didn't worship a bunch of gods. I mean, they did, but they weren't supposed to. They worshiped just one God. They kept feast days no one kept. They kept holidays no one kept. They had a calendar no one else had. They had all these things that were so different. Their culture was all different. They had a totally different language than everybody else. That, they were completely set apart. And the idea was, in his history, is thought that Antiochus thought, my kingdom is not prospering like it should because I've got too much diversity. We need to homogenize. Everybody kind of needs to just be the same. And so he goes in there, and to make his point in as vulgar a way as possible, he says, stop not eating swine, stop forbidding swine, for an example. I'm going to put swine on your altar and cook it there to show you that we're all going to be part of the same umbrella. The idea of fighting your government, trying to make you be like everybody else, is not a Christian thing exclusively. It has been going on from the beginning of God's people interacting with worldly governments. Verse 33. And they that understand among the people shall instruct many, yet they shall fall by the sword and by flame and by captivity and by spoil many days. So he's going to desecrate the temple. He's going to make war against the Jews in Jerusalem. And eventually those guys are going to say, it's time to revolt. It's time to rebel. And so they're going to rise up. Now it is known in history as the Maccabean Revolt. Judah Maccabee being the most famous guy who led this revolt. Judah Maccabee was the son of the first instigator of the revolt, Mattathias. Mattathias was the guy who started the revolt. His sons, plural, followed after him after he died. And as it says, look again at the verse. They're going to instruct many, start up a revolution. And they shall fall by the sword and by flame and by captivity and by spoil many days. The entirety of Mattathias' family is going to die trying to win Jerusalem their freedom from the Seleucid Empire. Mattathias is going to die in exile. All of his sons, Judah Maccabee, he dies in battle. His brother Eleazar dies in battle. His brother Jonathan dies by a false truce. The Seleucid general Typhon invites him to a peace summit, and while he's there eating, they stab him in the back, literally, and kill him. Brother John, Gaddy, his name, is captured and executed. And brother Simon is ambushed during a feast and killed by his bribed own son-in-law. So all of the sons that started with their father this Maccabean so-called rebellion, they all die. But they also win the revolt. They secure, for 100 years, in history it's called the Hasmonean dynasty. It's the first Israeli-controlled kingdom since Babylon took them in 586 or whatever. Daniel 11:34. Now when they shall fall, they shall be helped with a little help. but many shall cleave to them with flatteries. So while the Jews are revolting against the Seleucids, they will find little help from the rest of their national brethren. Most of the time they'll just get flatteries, the text says. They'll get gestures of support. They'll get nothing more than just, our thoughts and prayers are with you while you fight a war to save us all from tyranny. That's what they're getting. But Judah Maccabee, just historically, was so, not just charismatic, but so terrifying. It's probably the reason why the whole movement is named for him at this point, that he would have made Patton blush. He could stir people to pick up pitchforks and shovels and fight for their freedom just out of fear of him, not fear of Antiochus. Like the ruler who offered the swine on the altar, they were willing to let that go. But when Judah Maccabee comes knocking on your door and says, we're fighting tomorrow, and if I don't see you there, you'll see me here tomorrow, you pick up a sword and you go fighting. And that's why, unfortunately, for the rebellion, when the battle got hairy, Maccabee would keep fighting to the bitter end. And his soldiers, a lot of them would cut and run because they were only fighting because they were terrified of him. So just a little insight into what kind of person he was. Not necessarily a nice guy. Not necessarily a hero, but just a person used to accomplish a purpose. So anyway, that victory leads to the Hasmonean dynasty, which lasts 100 years until Herod and Rome into the time of Christ. Verse 35. Some of them of understanding shall fall, to try them and to purge and to make them white, even to the time of the end, because it is yet for a time appointed. So this is just a very poetic way of summarizing the struggle for independence under Maccabee. You have this period of darkness and of hatred and of murder and of fighting and warfare and bloodshed. But from God's perspective, what he sees is it's a time of trying. Like we use the phrase, it's a trying time. I don't know if we even know what that's supposed to mean. We say it's really trying. What we mean is it hurts really bad. Okay? We say it's wearing me out. But to be tried is to be burned in the fire so that when the fire is done, you come out stronger. A trying time is what Christians are supposed to live through all the time. Your times are supposed to be trying, because if your times are not trying, you're brittle and you'll break. You're weak and you'll crack. But a trying time is to go through the trying fires. And that's what was happening here. So it was to try them and to purge them, to weed out the impurities in their nation, to make them white, to make them pure, in other words. Even to the time of the end, which is the time appointed by God. In other words, you get yourself pure because God has an end point in mind. God has a purpose behind all this. 36. Was that the second bell or the first? Okay, 36. And the king shall do according to his will, and he shall exalt himself and magnify himself above every god, this Antiochus we're talking about, and shall speak marvelous things against the God of gods, and shall prosper till the indignation be accomplished. For that is determined, for that which is determined shall be done. All right, look at the end of this verse. He will speak marvelous things against the God of gods. Now, from there, what does your Bible say? Mine says, prosper till the indignation be accomplished. Until, all right, what that means is, the prophet is saying, or God is telling the prophet, this guy's going to do great evil, and he's going to do a lot of evil until he doesn't anymore. He's going to have all this success until he just hits the brick wall of God saying, no more. He's going to think through all this success, if I had success yesterday, I'll have success today. Why won't I have success tomorrow? Because from his perspective, he's like the deer that's never outrun a car. Like I said this in the pulpit once, every deer thinks he's faster than every Buick that's ever been because he's always outrun one, right? The deer that's never outrun a car is not around to tell the other deer, you can't outrun a car. You get me? So that arrogance of thinking you'll always run past the next one always lasts until the one gets you. And that's Antiochus. That's what happens. In his mind, he's above all gods. That's why he calls himself Epiphanes, God on earth. The real God says, until I say you're not, and then I'll show you I'm in charge. All right. Sorry we didn't finish it. Sorry, it was very convoluted. But I just want to get through the chapter. We have another week to go to get through this and chapter 12.